You aren't losing your life to failure. You're losing it to later. And this was something Ethan Blake never questioned until the cost of it finally became impossible to ignore. For most of his adult life, Ethan believed he was doing everything right, not in a bold or passionate way, but in the quiet, socially approved way that earns trust instead of attention. He woke up when his alarm rang, not because he felt rested or eager, but because routine had become instinct. He moved through his mornings with practiced efficiency, showering, dressing, and leaving his apartment at nearly the same minute every day, as if his body had memorized the choreography of responsibility. He showed up when expected, smiled when appropriate, and completed his work without complaint, never missing deadlines, never creating friction, never asking for more than what was offered. From the outside, his life looked stable, dependable, and safe, the kind of life people describe as settled. But stability can quietly become a cage when it replaces meaning. Over time, Ethan learned to confuse endurance with purpose and busyness with progress. And as long as he kept moving, he believed he was living. His days lined up neatly, one after another, blending so smoothly that they lost their edges, each week dissolving into the next like identical pages torn from a calendar. If anyone asked how he was doing, he answered automatically with phrases that required no explanation. Words like, "I'm fine," or "can't complain." Responses designed to close the conversation before it reached anything real. Nothing in his life was visibly broken, and that was the most dangerous part, because there was no clear reason to stop and question it. He had a respectable job, a modest but clean apartment, a calendar full of obligations, and a reputation for being reliable, the man everyone trusted because he never disrupted the flow. Yet beneath that surface, something was slowly disconnecting. Ethan often felt as though life was happening a few inches in front of him, just beyond reach, as if he were watching his own experiences through a thick pane of glass. He attended dinners, family gatherings, and vacations, nodding and laughing at the right moments, but later struggled to remember what had been said or how he had felt, because the moments passed through him without leaving an imprint. Joy arrived softened, stripped of intensity, while time itself seemed to accelerate, weeks collapsing into months, months into years, without his permission. At night, when distractions faded and the world grew quiet, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling a heavy pressure in his chest that wasn't panic. Wasn't sadness, something heavier than boredom and quieter than despair, a sense that he was falling, behind in a race he hadn't known he was running. He told himself this was adulthood, that life wasn't supposed to feel vivid after a certain age, that expecting fulfillment was naive, and for a long time, that explanation kept him numb. The realization that something was wrong did not arrive with drama or catastrophe. It arrived disguised as nostalgia, triggered by something small and ordinary. One Tuesday night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself sitting alone in his car in the rain-soaked parking lot behind a closed gym, the engine off, the windows fogged, the only light coming from his phone. He didn't remember deciding to drive there. His body had moved on autopilot while his mind drifted, and as he scrolled aimlessly, a notification appeared. On this day, 7 years ago. Normally, he ignored these reminders, but this one stopped him because it showed a screenshot of a text conversation with his father, painfully mundane in its simplicity. "You free this weekend?" His father had asked. "Busy? Next weekend?" Ethan had replied. "Okay, love you too." There was no urgency in the exchange, nothing that suggested it would matter yet. As Ethan stared at the screen, memory surged with unexpected force because his father had died suddenly just 6 months. After that message, a stroke that offered no warning and no second chances. Ethan remembered the hospital room, the sterile smell, the shock, the funeral. But what he could not remember, what unsettled him deeply, was what he had been so busy with that weekend, because whatever it was had dissolved completely, leaving behind only the absence of time he could never recover. Sitting in the dark, rain blurring the windshield, A thought surfaced that frightened him more than failure ever had. What if he hadn't lost time because life was fast, but because he simply hadn't been paying attention? And what if later had quietly taken more from him than he realized? As he locked his phone and leaned back in the seat, the silence was broken by a ringing sound, an unknown number flashing across the screen. Every instinct told him to ignore it, but he answered. "You're late," a calm voice said, and something about its certainty made Ethan's pulse quicken. He asked who was calling, irritation masking fear, but the voice continued as if the question were irrelevant. "You've been asking the same question for years without realizing it," the voice said. "Tonight, you finally noticed the gap." Confused and unsettled, Ethan demanded to know what gap, but the voice answered evenly. "The years you lost while waiting for later," before the line went dead. Seconds later, a text appeared with an address on Mercer Street and 3 words beneath it: "The years you lost." Ethan laughed quietly, telling himself it had to be exhaustion or coincidence. Yet something deeper, something instinctive, pulled him forward, and before he could talk himself out of it, he started the car and drove. Mercer Street lay in an older part of the city, where buildings leaned under the weight of time and streetlights cast more shadow than illumination, and the address led him to a narrow structure wedged between abandoned storefronts. Its only distinguishing feature, a small brass plaque beside a heavy oak door that read, "The Archive." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedar and old paper, heavy with stillness, and towering cabinets lined the walls, each filled with narrow drawers labeled with ordinary names that felt uncomfortably familiar. At the center of the room sat an older man behind a wooden desk, calm and composed, as if Ethan's arrival had been anticipated. When Ethan demanded answers, the man listened patiently before explaining that time was measured here not in hours or years, but in units of attention, because most people don't lose their lives to tragedy. They lose them quietly through postponement, distraction, and the comforting illusion that later is guaranteed. He slid 2 brass tokens across the desk, one engraved with spent, the other with aware, and explained that what had already been spent could not be reclaimed, but awareness could alter everything that followed. When he gestured toward a long hallway lined with doors bearing Ethan's name and specific years, Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the first one, confronting memory after memory of moments he had technically lived, but never fully inhabited, watching birthdays, relationships, and conversations pass, while his attention drifted elsewhere, each door closing with a finality that echoed in his chest. He saw himself at crowded dinners, mentally absent, vacations reduced to logistics, conversations with his father kept shallow because deeper ones could always happen later, each year ending with silence and the sound of a door locking. By the time he reached the door, marked with the present year, his legs felt weak, and inside, he saw a projection of his future, self older and hollow, surrounded not by people, but by records, whispering that the greatest fear was not failing at life, but realizing your memories feel like something you observed instead of lived. When Ethan stumbled back into the main room, dawn had begun to filter through the windows, and though only minutes had passed, he felt as though an entire lifetime had shifted. Stepping back into the waking city, he noticed the color of the morning light, the sound of traffic, the weight of his own breath, and for the first time in years, he understood that the years he had lost were gone forever, but the moment directly in front of him was still alive, still real. And this time he chose to be there for it, not later, not someday, but now.